Short term, the S&P market is topping in the next 2 weeks, as you can see in this chart. This is the 23rd of March in the afternoon on Saturday. We've been discussing the 18-year cycle and the 12-year cycle and the 24-year cycle, all having agreement since March 12th, where they all implied that the market would rally until the 25th or longer. The high on the 25th is Monday, and there's a very good chance that that is the beginning of a sideways phase that could last until as late as April 10th. But we're not expecting a dramatic continuation on the upside. Potentially the market goes slightly higher between now and then, but it's a topping phase. It's a down, up, down, up, down, up kind of pattern. And finally, in the later part of April, it should make a low. Either between the 16th and the 24th of April, we're expecting to see the next low. But it may gyrate and just do nothing much until it's ready to fall in the C wave that could come between the 10th and the 24th of the month of April. After that, of course, we're expecting to see further higher prices until late May. May 23rd comes up as a potential date for the highest high, which could be completing the move that started October 27th of 2023. And we should see potentially higher prices, minimally 5,400, but it's coming up. The MBT technique, the momentum balance technique, is now showing the possibility of the May high could be as high as 5,600. All right, so that's the main story. But what's interesting is on Sunday night, early Monday morning, there's a lunar eclipse that's taking place. It turns out the eclipse that's happening hasn't happened in a long time in this particular sign of the zodiac. It happened in 2006, which is why the 2006 market has been repeating for about over a year at 85% level of correlation, as you can see in this chart. So it seems like this eclipse that's coming up is going to be in many ways similar to the effects that were happening back in 2006. Interestingly enough, we also have that the 1996 market 28 years ago was one of the patterns that was also repeating very, very closely. And the 28-year cycle was discovered by Jan Benestad. JB Cycles is the YouTube site. And he found that it seems to be effectively repeating over and over and over again for the last 200 years in a general way on a kind of a monthly chart basis. But the fun part about it is that the 28-year cycle has the positions of Rahu and Ketu are exactly opposite where they are right now and opposite where they were in 2006, 18 years ago, which is the same as where they are now. Okay? And what's interesting is even though they're opposite, the market is repeating very, very much the same dates. Now, the price action isn't identical, but extremely close. In 28 years ago, you had the low October 27th. We had one in October 27th. 28 years later, and it had a high, another rally starting January 17th of 1996, and we had one starting January 17th of 2024. And we also have the same follow-through. There's a high in May, in late May, and in 1996 you had a high on May 23rd. In 2006, which has been about 10 days off, you had a high on May 10th, so add 10 is May 20th. And then they both have a big break down in June into July. And in 1996, there's a high May 23rd, a low on July 24th. Okay, that's what we're looking for now. A topping pattern with a break at the end in the middle of April into late April. Another rally resuming to new highs in May. And then a very nice break. And that break is a correction of the move that started October 27th that should be ending in May, roughly 7 months later.
You know, Rahu and Ketu always seem like some little outer space dudes that have come to influence the Earth. Can you explain what they are, what that phenomenon is, and why they can still influence in the same way even though they've flipped?
That's a good point. Okay, so it's really simple. This is all astronomy. It's not even astrology, it's astronomy. You look at the solar system, and you have the sun in the middle, and you have these planets, the Earth and Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and all these. They're going around in these elliptical orbits around the sun. But what's interesting is they're almost in a level plane. Even though they're reverberating around the sun, they could be going off at some weird angles, but they're not. They're all fairly steady in almost a flat plane. That flat plane is a name. It's called the ecliptic. And the ecliptic ultimately is the path of the sun as it moves through the galaxy, through the center of the galaxy. Okay? So what happens is, if you have the Earth and the moon running around the Earth, but the path of the moon is going above and below the Earth, above and below that flat plane, above and below the ecliptic. So when it goes above that midpoint, that's called the north node. And when it comes down and crosses back onto the underside of the ecliptic, it's called the south node. It's just a point. But it keeps moving because the Earth keeps moving through its cycle and the sun keeps moving through its cycle. So the path of that point, which is created every month, as it were, when the moon goes up and back through that point, it turns out to have its own cycle, its own rhythm. That rhythm is 18.6 years. And so the nodes have an 18.6-year cycle of moving through the zodiac, the longitude of the zodiac, okay? And that's all it is. It's really just an astronomical name for the intersection point between the moon and the ecliptic, and comes above and below every month.
And Rahu is the...
Oh, Rahu's the north node. That's what in Western astrology they call the north node. And Ketu is the south node.
And the names come from?
Oh, the names come from a Vedic expression of a story that has to do with how they were formed, and they represent the head and the tail of a serpent, actually, which is kind of interesting. The reason the market can look the same, even though Rahu and Ketu are in opposite positions, is because they're in opposite positions. They're affecting the same two signs. One of them in Virgo, the other one in Pisces. And this time, the other one is in Virgo, and they switch. But because the two signs that are involved are the same, and the yearly cycle, the sun is in the same position, and the moon is in the same position, that because it's a three-dimensional system, even though it looks like a two-dimensional chart, up and down is the same, but the reality is, because it's a three-dimensional system, it actually can create what looks to be the same on a two-dimensional space, as long as the sun and the moon are in the same positions, and the slow-moving planets, Rahu and Ketu, they're in aspecting the same two signs. So it's kind of almost the same thing as it was in 2006, even though they flipped. So anyway, so the market's in a kind of a sideways phase coming up, with a final high in May. And when I say final high, it's not the final high for the year, okay? After the decline into July, we're expecting to see another rally continuing on till late in the year and into next year, okay? So the market still has more to go on the upside, but it could have a fairly meaningful decline between May and late May and late July, because the market has made such a big up move from October until now, and even higher potentially into May, that just a 50% move of that would be 700 or 800 S&P points, which is, fairly meaningful.